Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Thales Press webinar with Dr. Richard Vedder, entitled American Greatness and Preparing for the Future. For anyone who may not know me, my name is Winston Brady, and I'm a humanities teacher, the academic dean here at Thales Academy, and the director of Thales Press. As a teacher, I feel incredibly blessed to live in the United States with the freedom to teach what is good, true, and beautiful, but it's easy to take the freedoms and opportunities that we have here for granted. So that's why I'm so thankful that we're hosting this webinar with you today, Dr. Vedder, on the values and virtues that have made America the land of opportunity. We look forward to hearing your insights about what has made the United States the great country that it is, and how students can get ready for the future, whatever challenges may come. I would like to give a few practical details about our webinar today, and then a brief introduction for Dr. Vedder. So this webinar is being recorded, and it will be released on our Thales Press YouTube channel and our Developing Classical Thinkers podcast. That way you can find it easily once everything is said and done. And as you can probably tell, we are recording in a school. So this is our Thales Rollsville campus. At approximately 2:25, the bells are going to go off, and students outside of this room will transition from 7th period to 8th period. So at that time, we'll take a brief 4-minute break while the class transition goes on outside. And Dr. Vedder, once the bell to start 8th period sounds again, you can then resume your talk until its conclusion. Q&A is going to follow once Dr. Vedder is finished with his lecture, both over Zoom and in person amongst the students that are here. For any of our Zoom participants, you can type your questions into the special Q&A box, with Q&A being administered by Ms. Alexandra Strode. So I would ask that we avoid using Zoom, though, and its chat feature, unless you're having some sort of technical issue. So I'm going to turn it over now to Matt Dennhardt, who is the president of the Calvin Coolidge Foundation and a former student of today's speaker. He's going to talk a little bit more about the Calvin Coolidge Foundation and then provide a brief introduction for Dr. Vedder. But on behalf of Thales Academy and Thales Press, I want to extend a warm welcome to you, Dr. Vedder, and a sincere thank you for preparing your talk today and for sharing your insights with us.
Do it.
Well, thank you, Winston. It's a real pleasure to be here. As Mr. Brady mentioned, my name is Matt Dennhardt. I'm president of the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation. Hopefully that's a familiar name to several of you. We run a debate league in conjunction with the Luddy Schools down here in North Carolina. We host 4 tournaments a year. We hope many of you will consider getting involved with the debate team and the debate program. In fact, we have the next tournament will be coming up in April over at St. Thomas More, so we hope some of you might check that out. We also run a major scholarship program called the Coolidge Scholarship. It's a full-ride, 4-year undergraduate scholarship that the winners can use at any college in America that they get into. You apply as a junior. For this year's juniors, if you didn't know about it, I'm sorry. Our deadline has just passed, but if you're a sophomore or younger or have younger siblings, we hope you'll encourage them to check it out at coolidgescholars.org. Our work at the Coolidge Foundation is all about sharing the life and values and legacy and lessons of President Coolidge, who was president in the 1920s. One of the things that President Coolidge talked about often was American greatness, and that theme is one that we'll hear more from our speaker here in just a moment. To Coolidge, he did believe in American greatness and in American exceptionalism, but he didn't think that America was great because of its president necessarily or because of its politicians. He believed it was great because of its institutions that promoted freedom and the freedom of citizens, everyday people, to pursue what was dear to them, to provide for themselves, their family, and their communities. He knew that through the collective work of all those people in America, pursuing what they believed was best, that we would have a great country, and indeed we have. Today's speaker is a mentor of mine, a dear friend, and I think a great American, very much in the Coolidge tradition. He is as an academic, is the author of literally hundreds of academic papers on topics in economics. He is the author of numerous books, some of which include Out of Work, Unemployment and Government in the 20th Century, another book titled Going Broke by Degree, which details why college costs too much, Another book looking at the role of innovation called The Walmart Revolution, showing how that big box stores such as Walmart have changed the way that business is conducted. And his latest book is Restoring the Promise, which is a treatise on American higher education and how we can find our way back. He's beyond writing, he's also a leading voice in the public debate. He writes on economics for all sorts of publications. You can read him frequently in Forbes, in the Wall Street Journal. Basically anywhere on almost any day, I think you can find Professor Vedder being quoted or writing himself on a topic in economics, and lately, especially in education. Over the years, he's advised many world leaders. In the years when the Soviet Union was transitioning from a communist regime to what it is today. I'm not sure we can really call it capitalist now, but for a time they were thinking about that, and he even advised Vladimir Putin trying to urge the adoption of a flat tax, which I believe was. Maybe he'll talk some about that later. But many others as well, Benjamin Netanyahu and sort of national leaders here in the United States, to be sure. Although he's known nationally and has won many different awards and has advised, worked for Congress, advised many political leaders, I think the title that is dearest to him is professor. He's been the teacher of some 10,000 students, one of which I'm blessed to say is me. I've seen, knowing Professor Vedder for the last 15 or 20 years, that's where his heart is, and all the impact he's had on so many different areas of our national dialogue in the field of economics. Probably the largest is the impact he's had on his students. So it's my honor to introduce to you a towering intellectual, a great American, and my former professor, Dr. Richard Vedder.
Thanks, Matt. You never said those nice things when you're my student. Yeah, I graded 2 hard. Now, Matt was a heck of a student. I have 2 messages this afternoon. One is depressing and despairing, and the other one is much more optimistic and hopeful. It will be your job as America's leaders 20, 40, 50 years from now to make the future America a continuation of the optimistic story that I will soon tell. I'm telling 2 stories. But first let's start with the less optimistic story, that of America today. The first few lines of Charles Dickens' great novel, famous novel, The Tale of Two Cities, in many ways describes America's life today. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was a season of light. It was a season of darkness. It was a spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We live in a rich and prosperous nation with a glorious past. Yet never in my life, which exceeds the biblical lifespan of 70, do the math, have I ever seen so troubling indicators of crime, so many of them, as we do today. And your generation's role is to repair and restore American exceptionalism. Let me just give you 7 indicators. I'm going to use my fingers here. I call this West Virginia PowerPoint. Instead of using PowerPoint, I'll use my fingers. Let me suggest 7 indicators of American decline that we should be worried about today. I can't get over, I now see 3 students in this class wearing Bermuda shorts, which Cole is one of them, which in where I'm from in Ohio would be, you'd be arrested. I mean, you're a lunatic. Anyway, I'm sort of shell-shocked over this. Anyway, 7 indicators of decline. In America's great cities and even in some rural areas, crime rates are soaring, and the respect for the rule of law, which is so critical to our nation's success, has undergone decline. Secondly, internationally, recently America has been humiliated in Afghanistan by comparatively primitive peoples, and from Russia to China, authoritarian rulers threaten our national security and world leadership. Third, at home, our faith in God has diminished, as evidenced by declining church membership and attendance. We're forgetting that the 10 Commandments are more important and enduring than Minecraft or TikTok. Our motto, "In God We Trust," is increasingly questioned, potentially endangering our spiritual and even materialistic well-being. Fourth, our economic growth has declined compared with the 20th century and sharply relative to ascending Asian nations. Before this century is over, probably both China and India will surpass the United States in producing goods and services. Fifth, a sense of American togetherness expressed by our traditional national motto, "E pluribus unum," has become frayed. Leaders of each political party call their opponents despicable names, perhaps best evidenced recently by our current president, suggesting that those who disagree with him on his election law proposals suggest that they were racist. Over-the-top accusations by leaders of both parties contribute to a decline in civility and politeness necessary for orderly and successful political discourse in a democracy like the United States. Six, there's considerable evidence that the current generation of national leaders is totally and badly failing future generations, especially yours. This is best demonstrated by the huge amount of borrowing the federal government has been doing that your generation will be burdened to repay, and also by the irresponsible printing of money orchestrated by the Federal Reserve System, already leading to rising inflation and a possible downturn in the economy in coming years, which will be severe. Seventh, our schools are a mess, with some glorious exceptions, including yours. I had to say that, didn't I? But no, I believe that. Someday you will recognize how lucky you were for having parents who sacrificed to prepare you well for an uncertain future. That's what good parents are supposed to do. I would add that an inadequate exploration of our past is a problem, and that today's generation too often thinks all worldly wisdom began in the last decade or so, and that our ancestors were sexist, racist, selfish, and tyrannical. Regarding the morality of politicians, I would have preferred to bought a horse from Abraham Lincoln or George Washington than a used car from any political leader of today of either political party. One of today's biggest problems is that the modern big government welfare state has made us lazy. In a nation whose success came largely from hard work. A little factoid. College students today on average spend 1/3 less time on academics than they did when I went to school, but they earn much higher grades because us professors and school administrators have abdicated our responsibilities. We're doing less for more rather than more for less. That's a recipe for disaster. Take the year 2000. Bill Clinton was president. 64.5% of Americans over the age of 16 worked. 64.5%. Today, 59.5%. Now, if we had the same proportion working today that did in the year 2000, we would have over 13 million more workers in the United States and probably not have the supply shortages like we're having now, seeing now. We're forgetting that our success individually and as a nation comes largely from hard work and discipline, something that this school is inculcating in you. Now, there are other national shortcomings, no doubt, I could list, but you get the point. So let me conclude the dismal part of today's lecture with some recent polling data. When a pollster was asked recently whether the U.S. was headed in the right direction, only 29% said yes. Most Americans today have a pessimistic view of the way our nation is performing and what the future will bring. Enough gloom and doom. America has been imperiled before and gloriously recovered. Washington led a band of underclothed and near-starving soldiers at Valley Forge to great success within a few years, actually within a few months. Lincoln led our nation in resolving the division and moral crisis of slavery. We repulsed attacks on us at Pearl Harbor in 1941 and in New York 60 years later. We have demonstrated a capacity to overcome adversity before. Let's do it again. So indeed, another story needs telling, the optimistic story, and a more inspirational one. The story of American exceptionalism. It is a glorious one, and one most schools today are not adequately telling. You are among the most lucky people in the world. Of the more than 100 generations living in the more than 2,700 years since Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, in the 100 generations at the very beginning of modern Western civilization, yours is the single generation with the longest life expectancy and the most material things. When Jesus Christ was born, life expectancy at birth was no more than 25 years. In today's modern industrialized nations, it's more than triple that. Quoting the 17th century English philosopher Thomas Hobbes, life throughout human history was, and I quote Hobbes, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Not now. Not in America. But you're lucky in another respect. Not only are you living at a time of great worldly material abundance, you're living in about the most prosperous place on this planet of over 7 billion humans. You hit the jackpot when you were born in the United States. The average American earns more money in a month than, say, the average citizen of Haiti, Somalia, India, or North Korea does in a year. Americans live longer and eat and live far better than Haitians and North Koreans, with more food, fancier electronic gadgets, better schooling. People risk their lives every day to illegally try to enter America. Well, no one is trying desperately to get into, say, Cuba or North Korea. So America is truly exceptional. But why and how? If you came to North Carolina in 1700 or to Massachusetts in 1620 on the Mayflower, you would have found a land populated by indigenous Indian tribes that were by all ways of measuring very poor. How did America get rich? Well, the similarly poor people of China or Russia did not, at least to the same degree. Now, if you force me to explain America's extraordinary success in one word, it would be freedom. Now, if you gave me 10 more words, I would say America has freedom, a rule of law, and private property rights. The world around 1600 was run mostly by rulers controlling most of society's limited resources. Individual families typically owned little. At a time when most Americans farmed, the typical family worked on land owned by others, working for small wages. Wealth had been accumulated by a few families over the years, and they often controlled the government that set rules for the broader society. But beginning in 1607, 415 years ago, Europeans flocked into the lands we now call America. Over time, much of that land became settled by individual families who were able to purchase it and take ownership. People now had incentives to make the land more productive, clearing it to allow more crop cultivation, and increasingly acquiring very clever machines to harvest larger crops. Success was determined by hard work and a little luck. No autocratic leader like France's King Louis XIV or Russia's Peter the Great controlled the people. Taxes were virtually non-existent. What you produce, you could keep. At the time of the American Revolution in 1775, we were about a quarter of what England was, size-wise, population-wise, everything. By 1875, 100 years later, our total income and output in America exceeded that of the mother country, England, and the 3 million Americans had grown to over 40 million, more than were living in England even at that time. So from all over, but especially Europe, people flocked to America, most seeking freedom, cheap land, and a chance at becoming prosperous. The greatest human migration ever was happening. With hard work, you could buy land cheaply from the federal government or private companies like railroads and keep most of what you produce without paying burdensome amounts to some government. It wasn't until the 20th century that we even had an income tax, long after European nations like Britain or France or Germany had done so. So while such physical factors as America's vast frontier and the long distance between the American colonists and the government in England helped promote individual initiatives and a dislike of government solutions, our founding fathers were much additionally inspired by the Enlightenment thinking of great English thinkers, giants like John Locke, Adam Smith, Isaac Newton, David Hume, and many others. So this environment was perfect for the discovery of new inventions, greatly increasing our output, leading to lots of new goods. Americans invented all kinds of things to make life better, from the cotton gin and the mechanical reaper and the telegraph to the sewing machine, electricity, and telephones. Although the Europeans actually started building automobiles about the same time we did, by 1920, the U.S. dramatically led the world in the production of cheap, dependable cars. Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, Samuel F.B. Morse, Alexander Graham Bell, Cyrus McCormick, Isaac Singer, Eli Whitney, John Deere, Charles Goodyear, the Wright brothers. The list goes on of Americans discovering useful devices, gadgets, making life better. Now, why did a disproportionate number of the world's great inventions come from America? Do we have higher IQs than the people in the rest of the world? I don't think so. I don't think we're exceptional in that way. But part of the reason was people could invent things without requiring governmental permission or having to turn over to the government much of their profits. Partly it was because we instituted a system of patents which provided property rights to those with new ideas. Invent something or improve the way we produce it, and you get rich. Henry Ford did it a century ago. Just as entrepreneurs like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and numerous others have in recent years. Ford made automobile transportation affordable for the average American. Jobs provided us with much loved electronic devices, from personal computers to these things and beyond. He made us happier, more fulfilled. His success came from making us better off. To this day, America leads the world in innovation. But what about the poor people? Those who didn't invent things or buy property early and accumulate wealth through savings and hard work? What about those who are unfortunate, who from birth had debilitating mental or physical health issues, which reduced their ability to work? Didn't America do a worse job than those in other places like Europe or Asia in protecting the poor and alleviating poverty? The answer is no. We were a predominantly Christian country that believed that with wealth and prosperity comes rewards, but also moral obligations to help the less fortunate. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, long before America started imitating the governmental welfare state existing in places like Germany or England, Americans started charitable organizations to relieve the hardship to the unfortunate. One simply did not hear stories in America about starvation, even in periods of depression or high unemployment. Groups like the Salvation Army, St. Vincent de Paul Society, non-church affiliated groups like the Red Cross alleviated the worst human suffering more effectively than the case in continental Europe or in China, where literal starvation in the era of communist leadership under Chairman Mao Zedong was real and substantial. A fascinating detail about America's capitalistic successes is historically a large part of the wealth accumulated by the most successful entrepreneurs and inventors was ultimately given away to private charitable foundations to help the less fortunate. Well, who was the richest man in America 100 years ago? John D. Rockefeller. He ended up promoting the social good. He founded the University of Chicago. He supported medical research at Rockefeller University in New York. Now, when your parents were about your age, around 1990, I'm guessing, I don't know how old your parents were, but around 1990, who was the richest man in the world? Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart. After Sam and his widow's death, nearly all their assets went to support charity. The same is happening with such 21st century billionaires as Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. I don't want to imply that everything that's happened in America is exceptional in a good way. Most conspicuously, we had the institution of slavery for well over 2 centuries. And my early research was on slavery, most of it, by the way. I estimate that on the eve of the Civil War, the average slave earned only 1/4 the income of a free white person and lacked freedom, including an ability to be rewarded for one's talents in a freely competitive labor market. It is instructive, however, that a large portion of black income and occupational inequality was eliminated in the first century after emancipation, even before civil rights legislation took hold. In the quarter century from 1948 to 73, black median family income went from 45% of whites to 70%, which eliminated almost half the income differential. Not all of it, but a big, big start. Indeed, competitive labor markets are the enemies of discrimination. A bigoted racist entrepreneur who refuses to hire blacks or Hispanics, for example, misses out on good workers who go to work for their competitors. As the Nobel Prize-winning economist Gary Becker demonstrated in the 1970s, racial bigotry is unprofitable as well as immoral. Indeed, however, black economic progress has slowed somewhat in the last half century, and I would say largely because of the unintended but very real adverse consequences of the growth in the federal welfare state that particularly devastated black two-parent families and led to reduced efforts among minorities as they increasingly substituted new public assistance payments for work. But why generally are Americans more prosperous than most earthlings? Attracting people from all over the world wanting to share our material wealth, but also our freedom to express their opinions, and their religious beliefs, and enjoy the other attributes of American exceptionalism. Why are we richer, having grown more economically than, say, the citizens of Russia or India or Mexico or Romania or such advanced older civilization as France or Italy? Russia, for example, has vast natural resources, including lots of oils and minerals, and even a rich cultural tradition with famous writers and musicians. But why isn't it nearly as rich as the United States? For centuries, Mexico has had lots of precious metals like silver and gold, and more recently oil. But for years, Mexicans and others from nearby Central American countries have tried desperately to become Americans, sometimes literally dying in the process. Why? Americans are richer, but they have also a solid respect for the rule of law, far more than Mexicans do on average. We have an enormous respect for private property rights and an ability to earn large sums of money in legal ways. Mexico's record is far more problematic. For most of our history, we have let those with fabulous success, Cornelius Vanderbilt, John D. Rockefeller, Sam Walton's, the Bill Gateses, the Mark Zuckerbergs, succeed and flourish. We had not confiscating their wealth. Entrepreneurship, risk-taking, innovation, all that had their rewards. No one stopped you if you wanted to start a business or move to a different state. Americans could do their own thing without interference from others. This has been far less true in the rest of the world. We're almost done, folks. For these reasons, you are among the luckiest persons in the world. Most of you should live long and prosperous lives if we maintain the things that made America great. Freedom to speak, to pray, and spend your resources as you please. A modest-sized government that provides for core public functions like our national defense and police protection. But our continued success should never be taken for granted. I've already spoken of the deterioration with respect to the rule of law. Many want to virtually confiscate the wealth of those entrepreneurs who succeeded in life and dishonor great individuals who have helped make the American story a successful one. It will be your job, beginning within a decade from now, to help stop this erosion of values and policies and maintain, dare I say, restore America's greatness. If not you, who? If not soon, when? God bless you and the United States of America. Thank you very much. Sit down.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Vedder. So hi, I'm Alexandra Stroud. I will be facilitating the Q&A, so I will also open it up to all of you lovely people. If you have any questions for Mr. Vedder, I'll pass the microphone to you. And then for everyone who is online right now, please feel free to send any questions you have in the Q&A, not in the chat, but the Q&A. And we'll open it up to any questions you might have based on his speech today. Does anybody here have anything?
They're all sleeping. Not really.
Definitely not.
Cole was taking good notes. I noticed that. He wears shorts, but he also takes good notes. I know if they're good notes. He takes a heck of a lot of notes. Come on, someone ask a question. Yes, sir.
All right, first off, thank you for coming here. This was great. So my question is, you claim that the modern welfare state has resulted in people becoming lazy and stalling progress for African Americans. However, other countries, particularly European countries, which actually have more expansive welfare states, and yet have a higher labor force participation rate and roughly equivalent GDP per hour worked. So are these problems that you're mentioning like a necessary outgrowth of the welfare state itself, or dependent on the type of welfare state that a country implements?
Excellent question. Is the problem with the American welfare state is that its design rather than the very existence of it? And it is true, the word welfare states can mean different things in different contexts. But it's mostly an attempt by government to sort of provide a helping hand for those in need. Old people, we give them pensions. Sick people, we provide medical help. Young people, we provide schooling. That's an old form of the welfare state that everyone has. And I think most of us accept that no one should be allowed to starve to death and so forth. Do they do it differently in Europe, I think, or Asia or somewhere than they do in the US? And does that explain the differences? I don't think so. And by the way, in hearing your question, one thing does concern me. I don't think it is true that the welfare state, I think, probably has contributed disproportionately to the negative effects on groups of people who are using welfare services more. And that does include minority groups. It does include African Americans. It does include, to some extent, Hispanics. But I don't think these are problems that are unique to those groups of people. I think they are the ones that have affected it. For example, there is a good bit of evidence that has been developed over the years that people that heavily welfare intensive, depending on welfare benefits, are more likely to come from single parent homes rather than two parents in the home. Now, is the reason for that the welfare state, or is that just coincidence or something? I think the existence of the welfare state has contributed to that. Before we had a welfare state, a husband and wife might hate each other, kind of, not like each other, but they stayed together because they had to, because the kids would suffer too much. Nowadays, they can split because if the wife doesn't have enough money or the husband doesn't have enough money, the government will provide. So the welfare state has filled in some of the role of parents to some extent. And the evidence is pretty clear that that single parent households don't do as well as two parent households. The kids don't do as well. Of course, they don't have as much income, and they struggle more. And I think the welfare state, I don't think it was the intent of anyone for that to happen, but I think it was an unintended consequence. I think a lot of this well-intentions, but unintended consequences. And similarly, if you provide high benefits to people, they might say, well, look, I can make $200 a week from the welfare system and not work, or I can make $250, maybe we better double the numbers in this inflationary environment, make $400 a week from the welfare system, or I can make $450 or $500 if I work, if I go take a job. But if I take a job, I might lose that $400. So there's sort of a tax from working, you lose welfare benefits. Well, if you have these generous welfare benefits or government support, people don't work as much. Remember I said today, for some reason, there are 13 million fewer workers working than if we had the same proportion working as we did in the year 2000. The year 2000, not that far back, my friends, 22 years ago. You were born, not quite, but you weren't that many years away, and your parents were probably alive then. Do the math. They should have been alive in the year 2000. In the year 2000, 64.5% of Americans over the age of 16 worked. Now only 59.5%. Why? Why are Americans not working as much? Well, there are probably a lot of things at work, but one thing at work is people can get away with not working a little more than they used to. It's a little easier because, we have child benefits, care benefits, credits. In recent years, the last year or two, we had COVID benefits. We forgave loans. We did a lot of things to allow some people to live not opulently, not fancily, but could live without working. And so we have reduced incentives to work. And if people don't work, you're not going to have as much income. And so, and this, as I say, doesn't hit all groups evenly. People whose dads and mom are doctors and lawyers and who went to yuppie schools, fancy schools, I'll make it even fancier than your school. Phillips Exeter, which is a real snooty New England school, costs about $50,000 a year. If you go to Phillips Exeter and pay $50,000, your parents did, you're not going to worry about any of this stuff, are you, really? Even if your parents get divorced, one of them will get $10 million, the other only have $5 million, and, life will go on. But that's not the way most of us live, is it? And that's not the way that most of us live. So the welfare system, I think, has disproportionately impacted those with kind of at the margins. in society. And I don't think it was intended negatively. And there are people, well-intended people. Mr. Dennhardt back there, who introduced, who was my best student I ever had, I have to tell him. Anyway, Mr. Dennhardt has a building in his foundation does in Washington, D.C., a beautiful house built in 1797 in Georgetown, gorgeous, 12, 14-foot ceilings, chandeliers all over the place, God, huge. It was owned by once a generation ago by someone named Senator Pell. Who is Senator Pell? Does any one of you know? Are any of you applying for college? Pell Grants? You ever heard of Pell Grants? Well, Senator Pell had a good idea. He wanted to help poor people go to college. So they put in something called Pell Grants, and they did other things. Federal student loans. Some of you are going to be facing this in a year or two. What did the colleges do when all this went in? Did they just say, oh, that's nice, the kids are going to get more money, they'll be better off? No, that's not what the colleges said. I know, I work for a college. I wouldn't buy a used car from a university president, I'll tell you that. And what the colleges did is they raised their tuition fees. And they captured most of the money themselves. And the money didn't really end up helping the students so much as it did the colleges, the professors. Instead of going to Europe one time a year, I went twice a year. You know, poor rich Vedder, he gets to go to Europe twice a year. My wife and I even took 43 students with us to Italy with us on our honeymoon. That's true. And the government provided, you know. I even managed to negotiate wine with the meals in the restaurant, which is an unusual thing for a public university to do. By the way, I'm very proud of that deal. But, okay, I've said enough. More questions?
All right, well, we're going to have to do rapid fire after that one. You got a really great question that came out of there.
Yeah, I did that long. I gave a long, involved answer.
All right, so I'm going to ask you a question from online. The question is from Apex High School. What is your opinion on the Austrian School of Economics? And that might be a loaded potato, but...
Yeah, the Austrian School of Economics is a school of economics that is very skeptical of government involvement in the economy, very supportive of markets and free markets, and let's call it an anti-government approach to economics. I'm really oversimplifying here. I think the Austrian School of Economics has had a lot of said a lot of insightful things. I think it's been an important contribution. I like it. I've taught at their something called the Ludwig von Mises Institute in Auburn, Alabama, and places like that. So I think it's a good thing. Any other questions?
Do we have any more in the room?
There's one right here, a young lady here. And another.
Make sure you hold it close to your mouth, guys.
So you've said that our generation has a responsibility to restore and continue American greatness. But what exactly can we do about it if we don't go into politics professionally?
Go into politics? Indeed, that is a marvelous question, because I think it's based on an absolutely wrong premise, and no offense to you. You seem like a very attentive and bright young lady, but politics is not the solution, but what can you do? It is, but you raise an interesting point. The direction that the nation takes is partly determined by the political process. You're right about that. But it's partly determined by you as a voter, you as a contributor, and you in your actions, first of all, by getting a job, making money, investing, buying stocks and bonds or other investments in the American free enterprise system. You can make a contribution. You can earn money. The story I like to tell is and he isn't here, so I can talk about him. He isn't here, but the benefactor of this school is a man named Bob Luddy. You've probably met Mr. Luddy. Mr. Luddy is a marvelous human being. Mr. Luddy has made a lot of money. I flew on an airplane he has is so big, I think the front of the plane was in a different zip code than the back of the plane. It's a huge plane yesterday. Gorgeous. God, was it beautiful. But, so Mr. Luddy's done very well for himself. He drives cars, that I couldn't even think of buying, with fancy German names with 3 letters, BMW and things like that. So Mr. Luddy has done well for himself. But he's done well for himself by helping other people, by providing better products for kitchens and so forth, ventilation equipment and so forth. He is superb. But what he's done with that money, he's provided well for himself, yeah. But he's helped people like you, hasn't he? How many schools do you think Mr. Luddy has started? Someone here? In more than a dozen, one way or the other, right? In North Carolina, now in Tennessee, in South Carolina, in Virginia, because he thinks American public education is inadequate and needs to be improved. So he's created schools like yours. And it has benefited you, and it's made him feel good. It's what America's all about. Why isn't Mr. Luddy lecturing? Because Mr. Luddy's at his company right now doing what he has to do to make the money that will keep this going. That's literally where he is right now. And what do you pay? $6,000, $7,000 tuition? Seriously. In that range? What do you think it costs to educate a person at a public school in the state of North Carolina? A public high school. $15,000, $18,000 a year, something like that. Maybe 20. Yuppie, rich suburbs of, I don't know what the yuppie Research Triangle suburbs are, but it's in that range. You're paying a third of that. Mr. Luddy is, first of all, they do it more efficiently here because they don't have to follow some stupid government rules because you're private. So they're doing it more efficiently here. But they're also, Mr. Luddy is kicking in. He's helping. And some of you probably directly or indirectly getting subsidized by Mr. Luddy. You should thank God and Mr. Luddy every night, in that order. And I wonder what Bob would have said if he heard that one. I'll tell him that one later on. So that's the genius of America, folks. We got guys like Mr. Luddy. We have, people cool. We had John D. Rockefeller, these crazy thing. Gates is giving, the Gates Foundation giving money away. Of course, the Gates are, of course, fighting with one another there, so that's another matter, Bill and Melinda, but they're both helping. They're using their money, resources, to help people in some fashion or other. And that's what America's all about. They can have a good time in their lifetime. They have. Warren Buffett lives a decent life, lives nice. He's 90 years old. He says, when I'm dying, my kids will get $1 million apiece or something. They're not going to starve to death. His son already has a fair amount of resources. But I'm going to help society in some way. It's a cool system. It's an ultra cool system. We ought to embrace it. And when people attack it, we ought to say, you're wrong. And that's my message for you. You're wrong. And not you're wrong, but they're wrong. So anyway.
Is there another question?
Yes, sir. Or I didn't see who. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
First off, thank you again, Dr. Vedder, for coming. I just wanted to ask about something. So we know how poverty is related to things such as crime and bad education.
Sure.
How the welfare state creates a poverty trap where people are disincentivized to work. But my question is, what are your thoughts on this? What's supported by the likes of Milton Friedman, Martin Luther King Jr., and Andrew Yang in a universal basic income?
This is a 3-minute answer.
It was a 45-second question. I get at least equal time, if not more. I have had some, I think one way you can help people is by having a non-bureaucratic provision of some support for low-income people. You could do that. A universal income that you're asking about is one such approach. It has the possibility of having what we call disincentive effects. There are some difficulties with it. But I didn't say, nor did I mean to say, that we should be sure that no one starves to death or no one is given at least a minimal amount of protection. And among people on the right in the political spectrum, a very famous man by the name of Hayek, a very famous man, author of The Road to Serfdom, said a modest-sized welfare state is acceptable. And, but where do you draw the line? That's the issue. If you give everyone $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month, $3,000 a month, no matter what, I think you're probably going to create more problems than you're going to solve. But I may be wrong. I really don't know the answer to your question in entirety because we haven't tried it. But it's a respectable question, a good one. There's 3 of you there in the second row that are sort of, or 2 of you at least, are in cahoots with one another. And if you were 4 years older, I'd buy you a beer afterwards, and we would sit and chat about all this. But I'm afraid that option is not available.
You have to go to school now.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. For everyone online, we will not forget about you. I'll personally email these questions to Mr. Vedder, and I'll make sure he gets them back to you. Thank you for joining us online, and thank you, Mr. Vedder, for speaking.
Thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed this immensely. Thanks to the audience for their participation.